This recording gives you another recording where I'm actually talking. The other recording that is in Learn is using callouts. So, as always, we want to import the OVA file. Go File, Import, or Control-I. As always, navigate through your file system to where you've got the btrisk.ova file downloaded. Open that up and click Next. The settings by and large should be okay. We should be able to click on Import at that time. And once it's in, we of course want to check the settings. Now, right away, we have an alert here that there's something wrong. If we move our display on top of it, it says there's something wrong with the display. We should probably select VM-SVGA. Well, it doesn't matter, we're headless, but let's select VM-SVGA. Also, I guess I fixed this one. At one time, as the notes mention, it used to say USB 2, but I guess I fixed that and I've uploaded it. But regardless, anytime you import an OVA file, you want to see if there's invalid settings, understand what those settings issues are. It says you should use the more up-to-date display adapter. While we're going headless, it doesn't matter, but it clears the error. The other thing, we want to ensure that our host-only environment is set up properly. Now this time we're not using the Intel adapter, we're using the AMD, I think, adapter here. So it looks like it works. We'll have to see. We don't want to change that because the operating system is expecting a specific network of drivers. So you don't want to just change this indiscriminately. But again, be aware of your environment. We only need one adapter. Any questions? Does that make sense? Alrighty. So once we have that in place, we can start up our VM. Keeping in mind we already have another VM up and running. That'll work, I think. Let's try it. So, at some point you want to see the boot up. I should have watched the boot again. Looks like it's an Ubuntu instance, a long-term release of Ubuntu service called btrisk or btrsk1. Not a lot there. As always, we want to watch it boot up so we can get some clues to exactly what services are running. I missed them, so of course I need to start my attack as we often do. Now, I am going to make a directory called btrisk because I know there's some artifacts I'm going to want to keep in this directory, specifically that payload later on. Now, you wouldn't know this at this point, but I know I'm going to need this directory. I don't want to forget it, so I'm going to start working into btrisk right now. There's nothing in there. Perfect. First thing I want to do is nmap my network, 192.168.56.0/24. Doesn't look like there's any typos. There should be two VMs running. This one, which I'm pretty sure is 198. So whatever else it discovers is the machine I want to take a look at. And there we have it. So 198, I'm pretty sure that's me. I'm not going to worry about that. I've got another one here at 209 running some services. That's the one I want to take a good hard cat. So first things first, let's do a detailed scan of the services running. Of course, you have to do it as sudo. And let's see what it gives us. Okay, so VSFTP daemon, we've seen some vulnerabilities around that before. Maybe we could take a look at that. But as I said, I want to focus on the web service attack on this one. If I was doing a red team or I was doing a software security audit, you know I would go through that in excruciating detail. I would also go through this one in excruciating detail as well. But as I said, we're going to focus on the Apache. We are going to use an SSH connection, I think. Or maybe we don't actually. But we are definitely going to focus on the Apache on this one. Alrighty? So, let's take it from there. What do I want to do next? So, we have an indication of a website. Let's open up and do some web enumeration. So dirb http:// it was 209 192.168.56.209. Your IP is going to be different, of course, and I'm going to Nikto as well, because you never know which one is going to give you the important clues. All right, so you run them all. And as I've said before, there are other ones as well. There's a directory called uploads. Perfect. We are going to use that going forward. There's a bunch of JavaScript. There's a bunch of jQuery stuff. Now, jQuery in and of itself is a pretty resilient framework. There's a lot of eyes on it. There's a lot of people making sure that it's got pretty secure code. And when a vulnerability is found, it's reported and it's fixed. And if you keep your libraries up to date, you're usually pretty good. jQuery by itself is not a problem. Implementations of jQuery on behalf of others, or others implementing it on their own, that's where you often find problems. So there's something with jQuery here. It could be very secure or it could be very, very vulnerable. So if you're going to implement jQuery, understand that people who see jQuery, they're going to see how you implement it and see if they can figure out any vulnerabilities. Because at the end of the day, they can see your JavaScript code. They can go through and do a code audit of your JavaScript and look for vulnerabilities, as we are going to do today. Okay? We've got an index. There's a server status. It's interesting. There's a config.php. Wow, that's just like, wow. Well, we have some stuff that we want to take a look at. All right. And I'm at the bottom of page 2 of the Word document at this time. But nevertheless, I definitely want to fire up a browser and start taking a look at some of these things. First off, what's the home page look like? Well, that's peculiar. Let's see if I can see this config file. Control U. There's nothing in the config file, and that's pretty typical, but it's definitely something we need to take a look at. So we're back here. Let's take a look at the page source. Nothing. And does anybody know what the word anisapia or Hakadima, whatever these words mean? Does anybody know what language we're dealing with? Turkish. We're actually dealing with a Turkish site. Does anybody in the group speak Turkish? Me neither. Doesn't matter. All right? Doesn't matter what language these things are written in. First off, if you need to see what's happening on the page, Google Translate. Done. Right? If you can't give a direct link to the page, copy, paste into Google Translate, and it'll translate the code for you. And that's what I did. That's when I understood what this site was, is that it was Turkish. It doesn't matter because the language that we are concerned about is the language of code. And that doesn't matter if it's Turkish or English. What we care about is the code encapsulating those spoken or written words. Okay? So, we also see that there is a login page. Let's see if we can load the login page. Girisyap. Well, that looks interesting. So let's see what Girisyap means. Right click, search Google for Girisyap, translate. Not helping me. So let's go back to Girisyap translation. See if that gives me. btrisk login. Perfect. Login. So it makes sense. Okay, perfect. There's a username and then there's a password. And as always, we want to try our initial 1 is equal to 1 hash login. Okay, I don't know what that means. Control C, go over, say, all right, translate this for me, please. Trying wrong user information. Okay, well, that's interesting as well. Okay, but notice something. All right, it did a red boulder, and watch the progress meter. When I click on btrisk, which I'm guessing is login, given that this is also login, this is some short form of login, it doesn't actually look like it's doing anything from the CGI gateway point of view, if you will. It doesn't look like it's left the page. The red border, the pop-up, and the lack of the page loading and page tells me that there's some JavaScript going on. And we've already seen in our enumeration that there is some jQuery. It is possible they're using jQuery to do some, or JavaScript at the very least, to do some login for us. So the next thing we want to do is take a look at that source code. And again, there's going to be some Turkish language here, but at the end of the day, what we see down here at the bottom, and I don't know if I can make that any bigger, perfect. What we see down at the bottom is a function called control. And there's a string, and it's looking for something at, and it's also looking for btrisk.com. All right. If there is an at, right, and after the at symbol, there's a btrisk. So it's looking for the at btrisk.com. All right, together. So it's looking for an email address in the username before it'll let me log in. Does everybody see that? Did I make that clear enough? Yes? Okay, thank you. All right, so right here, it's looking for this string. No problem. Let's give them that string at btrisk.com. I don't know if I can make this bigger or not. If I recall correctly, I couldn't zoom on that, and I'm sorry. So I don't know if you know this or not, but you can control key and mouse wheel and zoom in or zoom out of my contact. So if you can't see what I'm doing, well, let me fix that as well. So this has become my action down here. Tick or 1 is equal to 1. And I did a hash, even though my notes say dash dash, and I'll take a look at that in a sec. btrisk.com. Okay, so I'm going to try that login, and it worked. Okay. Any questions? So I'm in. Are there any questions? Couple of things. We saw earlier that there is a folder called uploads. Let's take a look at that one. Was it a directory or was it a file? It was a directory, it wasn't a file. And there is a directory of uploads that I can see that it is currently empty. Perfect. Okay. There's also something that Gondor. What's Gondor? Well, fortunately, let's try this. Send. Okay. So there's a browse button and a send button and a text that says no file selected. Looks like I can upload something to the site. Now that I've logged in, it looks like I can upload something to this site. Alrighty, so let's try that and see what works. First thing I want to try and upload is a text file. Alrighty. Well, yes, sir. Yep. Right click and reload. Reload. Make it bigger, maybe. No? Okay. Can you try your SQL injection again? That would be my guess is that you have an error in your it allowed the code to go through, but I think you don't have a there you go. Typos will get you every time. Yep. Any other questions? All right. So, what was I going to say? Okay. So what I want to do is I want to try and upload some stuff so I can see what's going on. That's what I was going to do. So I'm going to again go into my btrisk folder. Nothing in there yet. I'm going to create a file, test.txt. Okay. I just want to see if I can upload a text file, because if I can upload a text file, I might be able to upload a payload file. A payload file allowing me, sorry, excuse me. I just got the hiccups for some reason. So if I can upload, like I'm going to assume that they want to limit what I can upload. And we're going to take a look at that in a second. But I'm going to see if I can just upload a dummy text file, because if I can, then I can manipulate the system to upload whatever I want. If I want, I can also try the following, test.jpg, and see if it'll let me upload that as well. So what I've done is I've created a couple of, I create your directory. See, Mitch, you're not the only one who has problems typing today. So I've created a directory for my btrisk activity, and I've created a couple of test files to see if I can upload them. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to browse. I'm going to go to my home. I have a directory for btrisk and all supported types. So it wants to allow me to upload the test.jpg. And I'm going to try, and dozia, I don't even know what that means, but I'm assuming the exclamation mark is a good indicator. As always, check your code. And I know I'm not on Google file uploaded. All right, I know I'm not in Google's Translate, but I found something that does my translations, and frankly, it doesn't really matter. Okay, and now let's see if I'm in the right place. And there's my JPEG file. So it does let me upload some files. Perfect. Now, I'm going to try and upload a text file. All right. All supported files. Let's try all files. Now, again, how did I do that? When I clicked on the Browse button, it says all supported files. And it has JPEG and PNG. But I can select all files in the lower right corner. And when I do that, it lets me select a text, and then I can try uploading it. And again, before it does anything on the server, it says JPEG, PNG, and I'm guessing it's saying only JPEG or PNG can be uploaded. That would be my guess. Okay, again, we saw last time them trying to manage their security by using JavaScript. Let's see if they're doing it again. And if you scroll down to the bottom of that code, that personnel page, it says if Sonic, I'm guessing file type, is JPEG or GIF or PNG, submit. Otherwise, there's that warning that we just saw. So they're using JavaScript to limit what can be submitted. All right? And it is a simple function called getFile. And if we take a look, where is it? Right here. The onClick event is get file. All right. So it's not even an input type equals submit. It's an input type equals button that has an on-click function call, and then the function call itself does the form submit function. So we have a couple of ways of fixing this. First off, on the submit, let's go on the submit, right click, and we're going to inspect element. We're going to bring up the element inspection tool. I am going to open it up in a separate window. We've seen this before. We used it quite a bit when we were doing the hack this site stuff. We were using this, and I'm sure you've used it in other classes as well. And unfortunately, I can't zoom in. I can't make my text bigger over here. So you're going to have to, I don't see an option for changing the font. So you're going to have to zoom in, because what I do is I actually go to the button and I change it from a type equals button to a type equals submit. And if you can't make that out, the code that I have is halfway down page 4 of the handout, where I've changed the input type equals button to input type equals submit. So I'm going to change that to a submit. I can change the value, but I don't care. But I definitely need to get rid of that on-click event. I want to delete the on-click event, just like that, and then click away. So now that it's a button and it still has the value of submit, I'm guessing what Gondar is. So let's try that now. I'm going to try and upload my test.txt file and see if that works. And it looks like it worked. Awesome. And what's most nice, if I right click and view page source again, if I don't reload that page, my code sits. No, it doesn't. It's gone back to what it was before. Okay. So sometimes it sits, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to have to change that code. No, it's still there. Yeah, weird. Anyway, it looks like it's still good here when it specs the element, so I don't need to change my code. And that's what I've seen in the past, so I'm happy with that. And again, when I reload, brilliantly, it allows me to upload a text file. Everybody sees that. Again, how did I do this? In my terminal, I created a couple of test files. One JPEG, just to see if the upload works and I could see the results. A text file to see if I could push something unexpected. Okay? And they both worked. Okay? Next thing I want to try is what we were mentioning earlier. I want to see if I can deploy a payload now. Before I deploy this payload, I have to modify it. So, like we've done in the past with our source code for some of the other vulnerabilities we looked at, we want to grab a copy of this payload, this PHP reverse shell payload, modify it for our environment. Because again, where's my document? Again, you need to understand your environment. I'm going to take a copy of this file, copy to my directory called btrisk, and I have to understand, I have to modify it because I'm going to push it to the btrisk site with my file upload exploit that I just discovered, but it needs a path back to the listener. It is a reverse shell that talks back to a listener that you've seen before on my Kali box. So I need to modify my payload with the IP address and port number of the machine that's going to be doing the listening. In this case, it's Kali. In this case, it's my 198 IP address. Okay. I also need to specify a port, and when I launch my listener, I have to match that port. So that's what we're going to do next. First things first, let's copy that file to our working directory. So it is, well, that was a mistake. Move that off to the side again because I need that. CP, USR, share, Word, web, shells, PHP, and then PHP reverse shell.php to the same directory. So I'm telling the shell to copy this reverse shell.php file to the directory that I'm in, so I can now modify this file. And you have your choice. You can nano it, you can vi it if you're comfortable with vi, and you can also mouse pad this file as well. Of course, if you're going to do that, you should really supply the file name, mousepad space php reverse shell.php, and this is our file right here. Okay. And it is pretty well commented, I have to say. It tells you what to do, what not to do, where you can make changes, and where you should stop making changes. Okay, that's good. Okay, and right away down around line, I don't even know what, it's only like 1 or 2 pages down from the top. It's saying you've got to change the IP address, because right now it's talking back to itself, and if you have a listener running on the same place as your payload is deployed, then that's kind of silly. It gives us the chance to modify the shell if we really want to, but we probably shouldn't. But we definitely want to change the IP address and possibly change the port. At the very least, be aware of the port. I am going to change the IP address to my Kali IP address. There's a couple of different ways of doing it. You can just, often when I change these files, I'll leave the original in place and modify one. But let's be honest here, we're only using it once. We don't need to keep the old configuration in place because it's already a copy. So 192.168.56.198. That is the IP address of Kali. So you really need to ensure that you understand your environment. As I've said so many times now that it starts to sound hollow to me. You don't necessarily need to change the port. You at the very least need to be aware of it. So that's the only change I'm going to make. Change the IP address to my Kali machine. Save that, and I can move that off to the side now. I'll leave it there so you can see it like that. And now I can, well, let's just make sure. File, save. All right. Now, again, I want to upload that shell file I just created. If you don't see it here, make sure that you select all files in the lower right corner. Select the php reverse shell.ph file. Click on open. Ensure that you still have input type equals submit and no on-click event tied to that submit button, and then click on Gondor. File save, Control S. It didn't. That's just it. It didn't. I didn't save it. It just didn't change it back. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. And that's, I've seen that happen as well. It's not consistent, and I'm sorry about this. So you just need to go back and change the type from button to submit and delete the on-click event. Not just the function call, but the entire on-click event function and argument. Okay? Another option, while I have you here, I mean, I can go down here. I can also add PHP. I can add another source down in the JavaScript. There's no single way to do these things. All right, we're hacking. We found a vulnerability, and now we're hacking it. We either ignore the function call, get file, or we modify the function down here to include PHP files. That's acceptable as well. Okay, and I'd rather you understand that as much as anything. Okay, but I didn't have to rechange my JavaScript, input type equals submit and the on-click event. I didn't have to change those because it remembered on my environment. Okay, and when I reload my uploads directory, there's my PHP first shell. Now, you can click on this at this time, and it says, hey, didn't work, but that's fine. we can go back. If you click on it and you see something like this, you've forgotten to launch your listener. This is also important. Before you can launch your payload, you have to have a listener running. Mitch, are you okay? That sort it? Okay, good. Before you launch your payload, you must have a listener accepting the payload. Okay? Before I click on this, I have to go back and have a listener running in my environment. And we've seen this before. We're going to use nc command. nc-nvlp. We know the port this time is 1, 2, 3, and 4. And let's see what happens. And I'm going to have them side by each so you can see. So now when I click on my payload, if I've done it properly, I right away get an indication here that it is trying to start a shell, that my username is www.data, and I actually looks like I have a prompt. Of course, the first thing we do is who am I? Perfect. Also note that my page is again trying to load. It's trying to load the php reverse shell.php file. And you can see it in the status, which jumps around on you, but you can see it down on the bottom, right near my pointer. Okay? At this point, you have successfully deployed and exploited a reverse shell tool. Are there any questions? Does that make sense? I'm sorry, were there any questions? Because that's a pretty big leap at that point. I appreciate the acknowledgement, thank you, but did anybody have any questions? Okay, so last class I believe I mentioned, and there's a link in this document, I believe. Do I have a link in this doc? I don't. That's too bad. I should have a link in this document. Oh, yeah, there it is. Bottom of page 6, I have that link that we talked about last week, where you have a list of shells that you can try. And then we try the shell on page 7 of the handout as well. I'm going to use the Python shell because this shell doesn't look very good. It doesn't let me do tabs. It doesn't let me do anything. So do the Python command, Python-C, execute this command, single tick import pty semicolon pty.spawn, open bracket, open double quotes because I've already got a single quote going, /bin/bash. Closing quotes, closing bracket, closing single tick, semicolon? No, I guess I don't need a single semicolon on this one, which seems weird, but okay. And of course, it helps if you don't have any fricking typos. Python, Python-C. Let's try that again. Typos will get you every time. Now I've got a better shell running. It shows me who I am, ls, cd, cd, s, bit, still doesn't work. Not cursor keys don't work either. But it might let me try other things. It might let me launch a utility like MySQL or what have you. If this shell doesn't work, exit out and try another shell. And I gave you that link that have all these different shell calls you can try. Okay? Again, who am I? Please note that whatever you type in gets echoed back to you. Whatever you type in gets echoed back. And that's just a function of these shells that we are using. They aren't perfect. They have little quirks like that in them. We just live with them and move forward. Okay? Alrighty. Now we are logged in. We can try brute forcing the passwords and stuff like that, but again, we've seen time and time again, there is a certain laziness when it comes to users and their passwords. We know there's a web application. We know this because it let us log in, and it took us to this file called personnel. Okay? We also saw earlier a file called config that was in the document root. Well, let's take a look at those right now. So I'm going to var www ls. There is an HTML directory ls. Clear didn't work. So we're kind of stuck. But here we go. We've got gonder.php, we've got personnel.php, and we have config.php. Let's take a look at the config file. See if it gives me anything. And right away, we've got our database connection information, database name, username, and the password, which is the username spelled backwards. So again, they have root running. They are connecting as the connection string information for the database, which you should never do. Because now I can log in as root. I should also probably EAF and look for root processes running. Python's as root. That's failed to ban server. Well, that's interesting. I don't see MySQL running as root. SSH is running as root. That might be exploitable. But again, we're going to focus on the website for me. Okay, so we've got a data connection string here. Username, root, password, Tor, and a database called Dynamy. All right, let's take a look at that and see if we can't at least exfiltrate some data. So MySQL -u root, and this time -b, which says prompt me for the password. And the password is TOOR, just like that. Now I'm going to show you something. All right, I'm going to exit out of my Python script. I'm still, who am I? I'm going to try MySQL -u root -p TOOR. And this is why we fire up new shells, because I can't do anything now until I quit at utility and I get my prompt back. If you try and launch something like the MySQL client, like some of the other utilities we're going to take a look at, and you can't see anything, you need a better shell. And that's when you do the Python -c and then import pty.spawn, open bracket, open quote, bin bash, double quotes, brackets, single tick, so that now I can MySQL this -u root -p. So sometimes you have to fire up a better shell if you want to take your attack to the next level. Also, again, because it is a weak shell, it does echo back even things it shouldn't. We should not see the password being echoed back. But because we've got a less than perfect hacking environment, we see these things. Show databases. There's a Dynamy database. Use Dynamy. Show tables. We could probably figure this out in the other one, but there we have a user table. Select star from user and parola. Don't know what that is. Don't know what any of these columns are. Interesting. I could check them out. But this looks like a username or an email. This looks like a username, but there's a space, so it's unlikely it's a username. That could be an email address, but parola, I definitely want to take a look at parola. So let's, again, go into our translator, P-A-R-O-L-A. And does that translate for me? Password. Awesome. And that does not look like any password to me that would be encrypted. It's just too short. It's also repeating, which is another sign of lazy password management. So what am I going to do with that? I am going to try the su command. I might have enough information from my database. I would expect that. I would steal that information, but I would try the su command. And when it's asking for a password, ASD123 ****. Who am I? I am root. Any questions? Okay, Let's review. A couple of things are going on inside of this attack. First off, mostly web. All right, we're not actually going to exploit, and you can try. I don't think I have tried. I've been using this one for a long time. I don't remember if there's an SSH exploit or if the VSEP is exploitable. I can't remember. It may very well be. But I focus primarily on web at this point because I really want you guys focusing on web attacks. And that's what this is. I mean, I'm using a shell here, I know, but I'm using a shell because I was able to upload a payload in this environment. And the reason why I was able to upload a payload is because the creator of this website was trusting JavaScript, which means you were trusting information from the client. Client-side JavaScript, obviously. This isn't server-side JavaScript stuff. Obviously, this is purely client-side. So we can see the code and we can manipulate the code, which is, of course, problematic. Because we were able to manipulate the code, we were able to deploy a reverse shell and then click on that shell to start a remote shell. But before we click on our payload, we must, before anything else, start our listener. Also, we have to ensure that our payload talks back to our Kali machine. Okay? I must configure my payload with the IP address of the machine that I want it to talk back to. And the port as well, or we can just use the port. You can change this, but if you change this, you have to use a different port on your listener. All right? Whatever works for you. Once I have that, I deploy my payload. Before I launch my payload, I launch my listener on the port, and then as soon as I click on my payload, the listener starts a shell. This shell is too limiting for me to do anything. Specifically, it doesn't allow me to start a MySQL session. So what I do is I start a better shell using the Python. Once you type it correctly, the Python -c or execute this command, and then you import the PTY module. And then you spawn a new shell. And that new shell allows you to start a MySQL session, and then you can go and do some more analysis. You find something that looks suspicious, and you try it. Any questions? Does that make sense? There is a competency with this activity, and there's a competency with the Mr. Robot that we're going to take a look at. I think I look at that with you on Thursday. So I would really strongly encourage you to take the next hour and make sure you can write a report on this. If anybody wants to do any competencies, I will be at my desk until 2 o'clock. I'm going to stop the recording.